What is up, my dudes? Today I wanted to make a quick guide on how to use the AWP, which is in-game called the AWM, but I'm going to be referring to it as the AWP or AWP, since that's how it is called in CSGO. I'm going to give you short tips. First I'm going to talk about the numbers of the weapon and the stats, and then I'm going to get a bit more specific about how to shoot it and how you should be playing cover and movement, and also how your choice of a secondary weapon should be. The AWP is the most damaging weapon in this game. It deals more than 100 damage. Obviously you need 100 damage to kill someone on full health to the stomach, more than 100 HP to chest and arms, nearly 500 HP to the head, but only about 84 or sometimes 86 HP to the legs. That means that the AWP is capable of one-shotting nearly everyone, actually one-shotting everyone except when you hit them in the legs. If you hit a player who is on full health in the whole upper body part, that means he's going to die immediately. And that means that the AWP is the best weapon for just doing damage trade-ups, which means obviously nearly every weapon in this game which runs sort of automatic, like the AK for example, has a certain time to kill. But it's different with the AWP. The AWP only needs one shot to kill someone without the time in between the shots that the other automatic weapons have. That is why the AWP is superior damage-wise to the ARs, because if you have a gunfight with someone and you just exchange hits, you only need one hit to kill him, and he needs multiple hits if he doesn't headshot you. That is why the AWP is the damage-wise the best weapon in the game. Also, it has 10 rounds in the clip, and that means in a diffuse match you have 2 rounds for every player if you want to ace, and that means basically that reloading is normally quite unnecessary. You don't really need to do it, except if you spam smokes or stuff like that. Normally, if you have 6 bullets in the chamber, for example, you don't need to do the extra reload because it's not necessary. The one-shot capability, among other things, changes the way how you should play with your crosshair. With basically every other weapon in the game, you should be playing crosshair placement on head level. That means you run around corners always trying to headshot people. That is different with the AWP. The AWP does not need a headshot to get a kill. It can do the same with a body shot. That means in order to maximize your chance of actually hitting the player and hitting him deadly, you should be aiming for the chest, for the upper body level, because every hit in this area, and of course the head, will immediately kill someone. That's why you don't need to specifically aim for the head. One thing I wanted to get out of the way quickly is no-scoping versus ADS. ADS means aimed on sights, so obviously scoping in. People love no-scoping. It's fun. It's your movement is better than when you scope in, or obviously you see more. And also, if you look at this, You might think it's quite accurate. Obviously, if you look at this player model here, that one definitely fits in here, so most, if not all, of these shots might have hit a player standing there. But that is not always the case. No scoping is incredibly random. If I start jumping, the shots go all over the place. They sometimes don't even hit the training wall anymore. And if we compare this to how the AWP should actually be played, I'm just quick scoping. I'm not adjusting my aim. I'm just quick scoping, starting off this one dot. As you can see, AWPing does not slow down your shooting speed, but it incredibly increases your accuracy. That is why you should always aim down sights if you can. I'm saying if you can because there are certain situations where you can't aim down sights. For example, if you would have to flick too hard because you know someone's behind you, you can go for a desperate flick shot no scope. But if you are holding down corners or angles and you're sure the enemy can't get past your scope if he's peeking you, then always aim down sights. It's just way more accurate. So now getting into how to actually play with the AWP. The first thing I wanted to talk about is pre-aiming versus flicking. Pre-aiming means that if you hold an angle or if you go around a corner, you always have your scope where you think your enemy is going to be. That means if I hear an enemy, I pre-aim and I shoot. Flicking is obviously when you don't pre-aim, so you quickly have to adjust your aim if you notice an enemy. So I come around and I have to flick towards the enemy because my crosshair placement wasn't ideal. Flicking is fancy, no question about that. If you just come up here and flick shot a guy, that's one of the most satisfying feelings you can have in this game, but it's incredibly unreliable. Flicking is not how you should play the AWP. Obviously sometimes you have no other choice, but you should avoid flicking as much as possible. That means when holding your angles, you always have to keep your crosshair exactly where you think an enemy is going to be to minimize the possibility that you have to further adjust your aim in a split second or so. For example, if you hold corridor here and there's obviously players able to come from door room but also from mid, I would always suggest holding an angle like this where there's only one place where the enemy can come. Even if someone comes from mid, they still have to cross this line of sight to advance further. And that means if they don't expect you and maybe jump to make it harder for you to hit them, then they are always going to be walking right in your pre-aim. Different story with flicking, but also something that might pay out if you hold an angle like this. You don't pre-aim tunnels or mid, you can hold an angle in between. That means you will have to be flicking either way if players come from door room or from mid, but also you can hold that means you can hold two angles at once. It's risky, but it can be rewarding, especially because such an angle is uncommon, and if you are consistent with your flicks, that means that you can play more aggressive angles, but normally only cover as few angles as possible to minimize the odds of you having to flick. If you're passively holding a corner, then you always have to keep in mind how an enemy might peek you. In standoff, no one is as cautious as in CSGO. That means enemies are often not going to peek a corner like this in a slow and careful way, but rather just peek out a few meters and see if anything is going on there. So you have to be prepared for someone to come around this corner widely. That means don't hold too tight to the corner. If someone comes into your line of sight slowly, you're going to hit him. But if someone swings wide, that means you have to flick again, and you want to avoid this at all costs. So find a medium distance from the wall where you can aim in order to maximize the chance for someone to walk into your crosshair. And around this, the whole AWP movement and positioning is based. With the AWP, you always have to hold tight angles in order to shut off certain parts of the map. You can play the AWP aggressively and passively, and there's a lot of nuance to this, but in a nutshell, it is basically just pre-aiming, you shoot, and then always after you shot, you have to be able to quickly get to cover. After you shoot a bullet, there's a cooldown. I couldn't shoot in between those two shots. There's this cooldown that means that if you miss your shot, the enemy is able to shoot back at you without you having a second shot ready immediately. That means if you shoot, you always have to be able to fall back to cover in order to not die. Also, the AWP obviously has a scope, and that makes it different from other weapons because it means that you want to play from angles as distant as possible. One, to avoid no-scoping, because no-scoping is obviously inaccurate, but also to just have this advantage over all the other weapons without a scope. Hold the line of sights that your enemies have to go through and be ready to fall back. Take a shot from another angle, fall back again, change the angle, take a shot, fall back again. This is how you have to be playing the AWP. After a shot, it zooms in automatically if you don't do anything. That means that in between shots, if you want to maximize your movement speed when trying to fall back and changing the angle, pull out your knife or your weapon, your secondary weapon, your pistol, in order to get away quickly and change the angle quickly. And then there's one more choice you have to make when playing an AWP, and that is which secondary weapon do you want to play. I would always suggest buying a secondary weapon if you have the money and if your team economy is not going to be completely broke in case you lose the next round. When talking about pistols, it is pretty clear which pistols are the best and which ones kinda suck. Obviously, the Glock and the USP are pretty nice for the first for the pistol rounds, obviously, but after that they lose value incredibly quickly. The P350 once was incredibly good, but it got nerfed, and especially having a longer drawing speed and longer reload time, it is not a viable option anymore for AWPing. That means that the choice of the secondary really comes down to Tech 9 and 5.7 versus the Desert Eagle. The Tech 9 and 5.7 obviously are pretty much the same gun, but I prefer the 5.7 since it has 2 more bullets in the mag, and that means 2 more possible headshots. The choice of the secondary mainly depends on the weapon, on the map you play, and also on the area that you want to be holding. On maps that are smaller, like Sandstone for example, I would always suggest going for 5.7 or Tech 9. That is just because these weapons are better at close range, because they have a lot more bullets and can one-shot at close range as the Deagle does at long range. And that means that even if you hold a tight spot and you miss your shot, you can just switch to these weapons and spam them until you can change the angle and pull your AWP back out and try to shoot again. But on bigger maps like Province or Zone 9, I personally like to play the Deagle. First of all, it's my second favorite weapon in the game, after the AWP, but also because these maps are obviously bigger, and that means you will have to be playing your secondaries on longer ranges too. If you, for example, somehow empty your AWP mag, but you still want to re-peek and take one more shot at someone who has been, for example, hit in the legs by you, you can just pull out the Deagle and just finish off the job. It's very much just what angles you want to play in on which map you play. If you play on big maps with long angles, take the Deagle as a secondary. Obviously, you have to hit your shots for that. And if you play smaller maps like Sandstone, choose 5.7 or Tech 9. Thanks for watching. Peace out.